I was pouring hot water over coffee grounds in my Seattle apartment when my phone buzzed on the counter. A one-line text from my mother flashed across the screen. "This year, we're keeping it to your sister's family." No explanation. No invitation. Not even a token apology. I stared at it for a beat, felt the steam from my mug drift up across my face, and typed back a single word that tasted far sharper than it looked. Enjoy. What they didn't know, because they had never asked, never cared to, was that I owned a secluded $2 million estate in the Vermont woods. A place quieter than any childhood memory I had ever been offered. And this time I wasn't going to spend the holiday waiting to see if there would be a chair for me at their table. My name is Anna. I'm 33. And for most of my life I've lived exactly the way my family raised me to. Quiet, competent, low maintenance. People say I bring a sense of calm into a room, that I always seem composed. What they don't see is how much of that comes from years of learning that the louder someone else was allowed to be, the smaller I had to become. I grew up in a neat little suburb outside Seattle. Fresh lawns, friendly neighbors, porches scrubbed within an inch of their lives. My mother, Linda, kept our house immaculate as if it proved something about her. Inside, the roles were carved early. My younger brother, Brandon, was her son, and everything revolved around him. She never denied it. She didn't need to. Her voice softened for him, but with me it took on edges. My father, Warren, wasn't harsh, just rigid in a way that never bent toward me. He praised effort, but somehow my efforts were never the kind he noticed. I was 8 when I first learned how invisible I could be. I washed dishes while Mom rushed Brandon to football practice. I delivered his missed assignments when he got suspended for fighting. I was the one who called for help the night he collapsed from something he never should have taken. I still hear Mom's angry shaking voice. "Why do you always make things worse?" And then when Brandon came home from rehab, the backyard was strung with balloons, neighbors cheering, a giant banner waiting for him. When I got into a prestigious college at 17, Mom put banana bread on the counter and simply said, "It's quiet. Just how you like it." I used to believe that if I stayed steady enough, patient enough, they'd eventually see me. But in my family, recognition moved only when Brandon moved. When I got engaged years later, that dynamic showed up again. My mother asked if I could just reschedule the wedding because it overlapped with Brandon's birthday. And at my engagement party, he arrived nearly 2 hours late, blasting music, pulling the room's attention toward him like a magnet. I saw the confusion on my fiancé's face, the slow dawning understanding. He didn't last much longer. Neither did the version of me who kept insisting every wound was accidental. The final warning came last Thanksgiving, though I didn't want to admit it then. I brought someone new, Julian, a quiet, thoughtful history teacher who asked about my hopes instead of my responsibilities. Mom placed us at a side table just for space, even though there were open seats at the main one. When I mentioned buying my first house, a small sunlit 3-bedroom, Dad barely reacted before turning to Brandon to ask about his podcast plans. His whole face lit up in a way it never had for me. Julian squeezed my shoulder, his expression heavy with something close to guilt. A few days later, he told me he cared for me but couldn't keep watching me fold myself small enough to fit inside someone else's shadow. He left as gently as he had appeared. I promised myself I'd stop chasing approval. But habits forged in childhood cling like wet fabric. I still called home every week. I still asked about Brandon, still accepted the tiny stings in every conversation. Every call ended the same way. "Don't forget to wish him a happy birthday." So when Mom added me to the year's exclusion list, "Just your sister's family," I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask for a reason. I just stood there in my kitchen listening to the rain tapping the Seattle windows and the low hum of the refrigerator. Something inside me loosened like a thread finally giving way. The version of me who always adjusted, who always understood, who always made herself smaller so everyone else could take up more space, quietly stepped aside. For the first time I could remember, the quiet that followed didn't feel like rejection. It felt like room, open, unpressured, finally mine. I stepped out onto the balcony, coffee warming my palms as the thin Seattle drizzle drifted sideways like it couldn't decide where to land. My phone sat face down on the kitchen counter behind me. I didn't need to flip it over. Those 11 clipped words from my mother had already done exactly what they were destined to do. Draw a clean, merciful line between what I'd been terrified of losing and what, truthfully, had never belonged to me at all. I inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, and went back inside. My laptop glowed to life. In the search bar, my fingers typed the phrase I'd quietly relied on for years. Property deed. Haven House. In seconds, the document appeared. My name. My initials. My grandfather Harold's careful penmanship, steady even in his old age. A $2 million estate nestled in a quiet slice of Vermont forest. Passed to me, trusted to me. Never once mentioned by my family beyond the dismissive nickname. His old cabin. They never noticed the yearly property tax payments or asked about my winter disappearances. They never wondered why I returned to that house like a tide pulled toward its moon. To them, Haven House was nothing. To me, it was the only place where I had ever felt unconditionally understood. I clicked open the map. A crooked blue lake. A winding drive. The long narrow frame of the house tucked behind a line of towering pines. I stared until something inside me aligned with a quiet click. I don't need to be invited to their table. I can build my own. I opened a new document and typed the heading. Guest list. The first name I wrote was Aunt Helen. She had always greeted me with rib-crushing hugs and whispered, "Sweetheart, are you all right?" Even when I thought I was hiding the cracks. Her response came almost instantly, "Give me the date. I'm packing already." Ethan came next. My cousin who kept his distance but had always sensed the truth. Years ago, when Brandon had one of his infamous scenes, Ethan had murmured, "I'm sorry you always get stuck cleaning the emotional mess." When I called, he chuckled low and warm. "A drama-free Thanksgiving? I'm in." Then there was Monica, my steadfast friend who once showed up at my door with tea, blankets, and a look that said, "I'm not leaving until you breathe again." She didn't ask a single thing when I sent the invitation. Her reply was a screenshot of a plane ticket with the caption, "Choosing joy this year." My cursor hovered over one last name, Ellie. 8 years old. Brandon's daughter. The only child in our family who treated me like more than the designated problem solver. I sent her mother, Amanda, a short message expecting very little. Amanda called within the hour. "She saw your text," she said softly. She cried happy tears. "She wants to come. And if there's space, I'd like to join her." My throat tightened. Of course. There's space for both of you. That night, I booked my own ticket to Vermont and packed without hesitation. For years, I'd waited for someone to save me a chair at their table. This time, I was crafting the entire table myself. I reached Haven House 3 days before Thanksgiving, tugging 2 suitcases up the stone steps as the crisp air bit gently at my cheeks. The house looked exactly the way my memory preserved it. Pine-lined path, worn porch planks, a quiet, steady presence. I stood still for a moment, letting the rhythm of the trees and cold settle into me. Something long unsettled inside me finally loosened. Inside, it smelled like cedar and memory. I lit a fire in the stone hearth and watched flames wake up the room, one spark at a time. Haven House had always embraced me in ways no person ever quite had. The next morning I started preparing. I dusted guest rooms, swept the porch, laid a simple white cloth across the long dining table facing the big windows. One table. One level. No favorites, no sidelines, no invisible seating charts. Everyone equal. The thought grounded me. By afternoon, tires rolled over gravel. Aunt Helen emerged with a pie tin and a scarf flying behind her like a flag. "Sweet girl," she whispered, hugging me. "Your grandfather would be glowing with pride." Her voice trembled. Ethan showed up with wine and a bundle of dried flowers. "Figured you might want these," he said, almost shy but sincere. It felt like an unspoken apology for every moment he hadn't been able to intervene. Monica arrived at sunset in a burst of energy. "I brought cheese," she declared. "No clue what it goes with. We'll improvise." I laughed harder than I had in months. By nightfall, Haven House felt alive again. Coats draped over chairs. Soft conversations drifting from room to room. The comfortable hum of people whose presence wasn't an obligation. It was a choice. The next morning, while slicing apples, I heard small footsteps. I turned to see Ellie in a puffy jacket, clutching a crayon drawing of the house. Amanda followed her, looking cautiously hopeful. "You really made it," I said, kneeling down. Ellie wrapped her arms around me. Mom said we could come because you're doing a real Thanksgiving. Amanda winced slightly. She's honest. But she's right. I showed them the attic room, round window, thick wool blankets, the view my grandfather used to call a living snow globe. Ellie gasped, pressing her face to the glass. It looks like magic. As we walked downstairs, headlights swept across the windows. I frowned. Everyone I'd invited had already arrived. A door slammed shut. Footsteps. And then Dean. Tall, calm, wearing a dark coat, holding a folded piece of paper like it mattered. My heart stumbled. I didn't send you an invitation, I said quietly. I know. He held out the paper. Inside, written in uneven pencil strokes, Uncle Dean, please come to Vermont. Aunt Anna needs someone who stays. My breath caught. She wrote this. He nodded. She left it in my jacket pocket. He nodded once, the kind of nod that doesn't ask for permission. When an 8-year-old looks you in the eye and says someone needs you, you don't argue. You move. I stepped aside and said quietly, come in. He crossed the threshold slowly, the heat of the house melting the chill from his coat. No one questioned him. They simply shifted, opened space, made room. That alone felt like a tiny miracle. Thanksgiving morning looked like it had been pulled straight from a film. Snow lazily drifting down. The lake iced over at the edges. The whole house humming with life. Monica floated between the stove and the counter, jazz humming in the background. Ethan and Ellie were at the table, folding napkins into tiny paper swans. Aunt Helen guarded the oven like it was a treasure chest. Even Amanda, usually stiff as winter bark, was laughing at something Monica said about those tiny airline pretzels. Dean sat near the fire, carving a sliver of wood, glancing up now and then to make sure I was still steady. By midday the house smelled like roasted turkey, cinnamon, browned butter. Like comfort turned into air. For the first time in years I felt full long before the food hit the table. We took a group photo near the big window. Right before the shutter clicked, Ellie slipped her small hand into mine. Someone posted the picture to the extended family chat. 5 minutes later my phone started buzzing. Then again. And again. I didn't have to look. I knew exactly who was calling. Mom, Dad, probably Brandon too. They'd seen the photo. They recognized the house. They saw that everyone else was here. And they weren't. Monica lifted a brow. Answer it. You deserve this moment. My hand was steady when I hit speaker. My mother's voice shot through instantly. Anna, what on earth is happening? Why is everyone in Vermont? Whose house is that? I leaned back against the counter. It's mine. A long stunned pause. Dad finally scoffed. Don't be absurd. That's the family estate. It was, I said. Grandpa transferred it to me years ago. Mom's voice sharpened like a knife. So you chose to leave us out? After everything we've done. You left me out first, I said, calm as still water. Your text made that clear. The silence that followed felt heavier than shouting. I'm not punishing anyone, I added. I'm just choosing myself. Dean stood, walked over, rested a warm hand on my shoulder. Then he gently took the phone. Mr. and Mrs. Reed, he said evenly. Anna is with people who choose her. If that's a problem for you, maybe ask yourselves why. For once my parents had nothing to say. Only breathing tight, angry, cracking at the edges. Finally, Dad muttered. We're driving up. Then drive safely, I said, and ended the call. The room went still for a second. Ethan whistled under his breath. That was something. Aunt Helen placed a trembling hand against my cheek. Long overdue, sweetheart. Ellie tugged at my sleeve. Are you okay? I knelt to her level. Yes, I said softly. For the first time. I really am. Dinner felt like a holiday we built ourselves. Messy, warm, imperfect, real. The turkey was carved unevenly. The mashed potatoes were lumpy. Someone spilled cranberry sauce over the tablecloth. But the laughter? Honest. The peace? Solid. For the first time ever, I wasn't bracing for anyone's disapproval. The table was full and it was mine. The next morning, fresh snow dusted the steps. I was helping Ellie draw a wreath design when the doorbell rang, sharp and long. Monica glanced outside, then at me. They're here. I smoothed my sweater and opened the door. My parents stood stiffly on the porch, coats buttoned to the chin, eyes scanning the house behind me. searching for the version of me they used to control. Anna, my mother said, jaw tight. We need to talk alone. I led them into my grandfather's old study, sunlight falling across the desk like a spotlight. The room felt like a witness. You blindsided us, my father started. No, I said, placing a folder on the desk and opening it. I just stopped pretending. Property documents, signatures, proof. And then I told them everything. 30 years of being pushed aside. 30 years of being expected to step back so someone else could step forward. 30 years of silence I carried because they preferred it that way. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply laid the truth down and let it breathe. For once, they had no pedestal to climb onto. Just the quiet realization that the boundary was real and staying. That evening, when the dust had settled, we all gathered around the long table. The people who showed up, the ones who held space without demanding anything in return. Ellie placed her drawing in the center. Everyone standing in front of Haven House, smiling. No missing seats. No hierarchy. As I looked around, something old and heavy slipped out of my chest, gone. I wasn't fighting for a place at their table anymore. I was building my own. If you've ever had to draw a line, choose peace over approval, or rebuild yourself from the inside out, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments and follow along for more stories about choosing yourself, rising and becoming whole again.